So let's talk about WrestleMania. Your match begins with a Rock promo. Lillian's going to start with you, and then Rock just takes over talking about Hurricane and Rosie, and Lillian just can't wipe the smile off her face. It's really good stuff. You guys go 17 minutes and 3 seconds. Meltzer would say, Flair was in WrestleMania shape. Here's the real backstory. When Rock was a kid, he used to say, when I grew up, I don't want to be like my dad, but if I can't be like my dad, I want to be like Ric Flair. Rock was just mimicking Flair's strut and having fun doing all the Flair spots. Foley even did an elbow off the apron on Flair, and Flair had taken a backdrop on the floor. Foley has lost about 50 pounds, down to around 285, so he wouldn't be in bad shape for his return. Batista went to work on Rock. Batista still doesn't get it, but since everyone else in the match does, it wasn't a factor. Flair got slammed off the top, and Lawler was almost treating it as comedy. Foley did well. Again, there's major context problems between the build-up and what the match was, but it was good nonetheless. Orton and Foley actually went at it early instead of saving it for later. Orton sent Foley knees first into the steps. Foley was pounded on, including a ground and pound spot by Batista that he broke up with the claw. Flair and Foley worked, and I think that this was the first time the two were ever in the ring in match form. Flair did the people's elbow tease. Rock did the elbow on Flair and a rock bottom on Orton, but Flair saved. Batista hits the demon bomb on Rock, and Orton goes for the pin, but Rock kicks out. That allows the hot tag to Foley, who does the double arm DDT on Orton and pulls out Mr. Sacco. But before he could do it, Orton beat him to the punch with an RKO and a pin. The crowd went nuts for Foley after the match anyway, and he did the old Hogan after the Warrior match routine, 3 3/4 stars. So Dave doesn't give it a glowing review, but it is remembered fondly.
Yeah.
But
I think what he said about the context problem,
that's your issue,
built up to be
a blood feud. And now we're doing comedy.
There was elements of comedy in there. That was great comedy between Rick and
But out
Rock.
of context.
Probably out of context, yeah.
But that's probably, I'm not saying we're acquiescing, but that's probably what Flair and Rock wanted to do, right? And so it became more about what they wanted to do and less about what you and Randy needed to do.
I retreated into a shallow. I don't think I spoke up and offered that opinion.
So that's really your issue. It's not necessarily what happened bell to bell, but you didn't interject beforehand.
I didn't interject, and I didn't take steps to make it the best match the best performance that I could have. And then I was just so happy to see those guys. It was almost like I dreaded getting the tag because I didn't feel like I hope I'm not beating a dead horse here when I talk about how disappointed I was in myself. But, the success I had in my career was about overcoming doubts and conquering those insecurities. And on that day, I lost out to those insecurities and those doubts.
Pretty famous story you've shared when you come backstage and you run into Steve Austin. Do you want to share that with us?
Man, refresh my memory. I know it would have been the easiest thing to pat me on the back and say it was good.
I think the idea was...
And he didn't do that.
You asked, how did you think you did out there? And he said, I thought it was okay. And he said, I thought it sucked. Or something like that. The idea being, you were trying to maybe convince yourself it was okay, but he could tell you weren't satisfied with it.
Right.
And he didn't feel like maybe you delivered the way you had in the past. That was the insinuation from the conversation that's been shared over the years. In the public.
And that I think he knew that, I had been greatly outshone and then willingly outshone, and that it wasn't the match. Again, the context should have been a wild brawl, you know, so... 3 3/4 stars is, on Mania for two guys. I was at my first match in 4 years.
It's a handicap match.
With
essentially a celebrity and an older gentleman in Flair. I mean, not bad.
Right. Not bad. And maybe if I watched it back and I didn't know what the scene, the feelings were in my own head, but it definitely lit a fire. I don't know if it was on paper for us to have a rematch right away.
That's what I wanted to ask. It came out in the Observer that it really bubbled out of WrestleMania weekend. So that wasn't the plan in advance. Like, in theory, this was the original blow off.
Yeah.
But maybe you're like, no, I can do better.
I think Vince sat me down and talked to me about having a singles match. And I don't know if he shared my feeling that Mania had been a disappointment, for me especially. Sorry about that.
It felt more like an attraction as opposed to a conclusion.
Yeah. And I was happy to do the favor for Randy. It was really nice that the crowd gave me that response. I remember Rock literally going like this to me to let me have that moment. When I saw photos of myself, I just looked so drained. And you can't can't fake passion. You also can't fake conditioning. You know, like that's what's good. There's a saying that says, fatigue makes cowards of us all.
Yes, sir.
You know, and it certainly does, but it greatly reduces your ability to put on a show if you're drawn.
If you can't
breathe. You can't breathe, and it's just this withered, drawn. You just look drawn and exhausted, and that's not a good look. So had I not had that opportunity to come back with Randy one-on-one, that match would have bothered me. It obviously still does, but it would have eaten me up.
So, from your memory, Vince brings you that match. You don't necessarily bring it to Vince, right?
He sits me down in his office, and proposes that match.